Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast where we explore the science behind why we do what we do. I'm Kurt Nelson, and today Tim and I have a very special guest who brings a blend of jazz, group dynamics, and organizational wisdom into our conversation.
Yeah, Colin Fisher is an associate professor of organizations and innovation at University College London, and he's the author of The Collective Edge, Unlocking the Secret Power of Groups. Not only is Colin an accomplished researcher and author, but he's also a former professional jazz trumpet player. So he knows a thing or two about improvisation, collaboration, and finding harmony, both in terms of music and with teams.
Yeah, I think Tim really grooved on that part, right? So in our conversation with Colin, we are going to dig into what makes groups tick. We'll discuss the baddest of all characters in the entire Harry Potter series, and why structure trumps process and team effectiveness, and how the myth of the lone genius might be holding us back.
Now, whether you're a leader, a member of a team, or just someone fascinated by human behavior, you'll find Colin's insights both refreshing and actionable.
And as I mentioned before, we had a great discussion about music, in part because Colin is a bona fide musician, but also because he draws metaphors from playing in jazz groups that will impact the way you think about your team at work. We also touched on some stories and research that honestly make the Behavioral Grooves community what it is. Just one other thing, Tim, I have to mention to the Groovers that we read a lot of books each year. And Colin's book about the collective edge was packed with a lot of great ideas. And basically, we just want to recommend that all of our listeners, all the Groovers out there, that you go and check it out.
Well said, Kurt. It really was good. But you know what else is just really, really cool about this, Kurt?
Ice cream?
Ice cream. Yes, but our special person, ice cream. No, we are having an event celebrating our 8 years of doing this podcast. Ice cream. I'm sorry. It's just really through me. Okay.
Yes. Hell yes. Groovers, take a chance at this. Look, on October 16th in Minneapolis, Minnesota, we are gathering live to have a special in-person event, and you are invited.
We have a limited capacity and spots are going quick. So check out the registration link in the show notes. Book your airfare, book your hotel. Just come and join us on October 16th in 2025 in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Now, Tim, would it be cool if somebody actually flew in for this? I mean, that would be pretty damn cool. So
it would. It's possible. It's very possible.
We hope to see everyone there from around the world.
Absolutely. Lastly, we invite you to sit back with a fine pour of smooth, cool jazz and enjoy our conversation as Colin shares research that might help you rethink the way you build and lead teams. And we hope you enjoy our conversation with Colin Fisher. Colin Fisher, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks so much, Tim. Thanks so much, Kurt. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. So let's loosen things up with a little bit of a famous speed round. So first question, would you prefer to learn a new instrument or a new language?
Prefer new instrument, no question. Okay. What should I do is probably a different question.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So can we just spend just a tiny little bit of time setting this up, because we're gonna have music. You do play an instrument, or many instruments. Do you play multiple instruments now?
I do. So we'll let the cat out of the bag here. And I was a professional jazz trumpet player before I got into this whole business school professor author thing. And so I do play other instruments. I would say the only one I would tell other musicians I play is piano.
Okay.
But I would say by the standards that I've seen kind of normal people say they play instruments, I probably meet that standard for a few other instruments as well. But I wouldn't.
Brass, mostly brass instruments.
I have a valve trombone. I can make a slide trombone function. It's like anything. All the kind of low brass instruments have the same valve combinations. So I can make a baritone or euphonium work. I can, get some stuff out on tuba and it'll sound okay. I can make your various saxophones, function like I know what all the buttons do and those kinds of things. So, I mean, that's what happens when you go to a music school, right? There's a lot of instruments around. There's a lot of people interested in music, and you pick up a lot of things by osmosis.
Okay, so you said I want to learn. I should learn a language, but I want to learn it. So, which instrument would you like to become proficient on that you could say to other musicians? Right, that's what I'm assuming you're saying. Which one would that be?
It would be bass. So I wish I was a better bass player. So again, I know what the frets are, and I know what all the strings are supposed to mean, but I'm not great at it. And I teach my 17-year-old now son piano, and it would be so nice if I could actually play a bass and not just have to kind of plunk out keyboard bass things around. I've always wanted bass has always been the one that I think of the rhythm section instruments fits my personality the best.
Interesting.
We could. Are you going to go down this? It's a speed round, Tim. It's a speed round.
Okay. Speed round.
Yeah, we're losing in the speed part here.
We're already that nomenclature should be just changed. Okay. All right. Hopefully, this next question doesn't go down the rabbit hole that we just went down with musical instruments here. Are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker?
Coffee.
Okay.
Okay.
Living in coffee, good. Living in London, you not the tea.
I go through phases. I'll try and get off coffee and drink more tea, and it lasts for a couple months, and then I end up back on coffee.
Why do people say that? Why do if I could get off coffee, I would drink tea? Or is coffee that I don't drink coffee? Is coffee that addicting? Is it really that hard to stop drinking? Yeah. See, here's mine. This is full of water.
This is
Colin. Would it be hard to stop?
It's not that hard. I only have one cup of coffee a day. But I like it. I like it. This is probably the most embarrassing thing I'll admit. So I drink a mocha every morning. So I put like a bunch of chocolate in it. So the reason it's hard to get off is you can't put a bunch of chocolate in tea, or at least it's not very advisable.
Fair enough. Okay. Agree or disagree? This is the third speed round question. Agree or disagree? More workplaces should let people jam like jazz bands.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well,
we'll talk about that later.
Trying to keep to the speed round. Sorry if I'm
no. That's
to
good.
elaborate there.
Here is the last of our so-called speed round questions. How do you know if you're a member of Stratus or just sitting in?
Well, they tell you either they pay you for the gig or they don't pay you for the gig.
So this was a little snippet for our listeners. This is a little snippet from the book, and it's a wonderful little story. And I hopefully we'll get there and talk about that, because it's about how do you define who's on your team and what is a team in various different pieces. But we're speaking with Colin Fisher about his new book, The Collective Edge. And I wanted to start. You started the book off with this Harry Potter, asking like, who's the villain in Harry Potter, and it's not Lord Voldemort. I can't even say his name, right? It's the man.
You're not
don't even say his name.
Name. You say it's somebody else. Can you tell us who is the real villain?
So the real villain of Harry Potter isn't Lord Voldemort, and I'm not afraid to say his name. I don't know about you.
Oh my God!
But it's the Sorting Hat. And I say it's a Sorting Hat because you've got this object that's taking 11-year-olds and telling them, I'm going to read your mind and I'm going to put you into these groups that nobody ever leaves. Nobody ever escapes these categorizations that they're put into. And then there are, no spoilers for Harry Potter, but there's two wars that kind of bookend the story. And the dividing lines for this war were drawn by this sorting hat right there. And so it's like, yeah, we can blame the particular person who kind of, was the match that set off the fire. But you're creating a big pile of kindling if you're creating groups of this strength that then go around and they compete against each other. They, are being encouraged by everyone to, compete and insult each other and do all these things, which we know as behavioral scientists are really, really dangerous things to be doing.
Yeah. So tell us how does this metaphor play out in the book? When it comes to group identities, especially?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly our behavior is informed by group identities, both groups that we're in the presence of and groups that we just imagine being in the presence of. And that's what this idea of identity is, that we compose big parts of ourselves with these group identities. And they can be these broad social categories like Americans or Harry Potter fans or whatever it is. Or they can be much smaller groups like our family, like our friend group, or our work teams or organizations. And that the differences in the dynamics of all these groups are kind of invisibly shaping our behavior in ways that we systematically ignore. And we're actually shockingly careless about how we let those dynamics push us around. And so what I'm trying to get at in the book is to say, like, we know something about group dynamics and how systematic they are. And we know something about the conditions that allow us to not directly control all of them, but at least tame them and stop them from running amok in the way the kind of sorting hat puts everybody into groups and then lets it go. And actually what happens is something that social science says, yeah, that might be what happens if you just don't pay attention to group dynamics.
You set it up for failure as you're looking at this.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talk about there that I thought was really interesting is this idea that throughout, and again, we'll use the Harry Potter books as reference. Nobody switches houses in Harry Potter. There is like you are Slytherin or you are I forget even what the other ones are, right? But you become whatever that the sorting hat puts you into without changing, which isn't really how we work in the real world, because we do move or change and shift, particularly as you were talking about some of the different elements within there. How does that play into this? Is it a good thing that we can shift and move, or should we be more consistent? I'm an American, therefore I'm an American, and I'm always going to be an American, right?
So I think it's good that we can shift and move, and it's good that we have, from a perspective of we all have multiple identities. And the idea that we just have this one single identity that guides our behavior, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, from the time we're 18 all the way till the time we die, that's illusory, right? That we don't have one single identity. And it's more accurate to think of your identities as a network, just kind of like a social network where you have relationships between your different identities. Some of them enhance one another. Some of them might contradict one another. Some of them can be, marshaled in certain situations, the same way you'd call up help and advice from a certain group of people in your life in one situation when you need to move from one house to another. There's one set of friends you'd call. When you break up with your significant other, there's a different network of people you'd call. And or maybe it's the same for you guys. I don't know. But that these and so we call upon these identities that most of them refer to groups. They refer to other groups of people, and that thinking about that identity, then we're shifting during the day, during our lives, between actually being amongst these different people. And when we wake up, we're with our friends or family, our roommates or our family, and that kind of takes on one set of roles. So when I wake up here, I'm very much my father, my husband identities are most evoked. And I'll tell you, my teenage children treat me a lot differently than my PhD students when I'm at work and I'm the professor, right? Like that.
Right.
And that the way I think of myself and the way I interact is quite a bit different, right? That for some reason my teenage children are a bit less deferential to me than are my students who are looking to me for my expertise and paying to be there and learning something from me. Whereas you have to work real hard to get your kids to take the same level of attention. So
Yeah.
these dynamics, like I said, we just take them for granted, right? That's not an extraordinary story for anyone, and yet we talk as if we have this single identity, we have one way that it's influencing us, and we're really overlooking how different it is just based on who else is around you. That we can behave totally differently from situation to situation, and a lot of that is down to groups.
Yeah. So, okay. So the book really is about the edge that you get by being part of a collective, by being a part of a group. And you structure the book on 6 conditions that you use to promote effective cooperation. I'm just going to rattle through them just so that our listeners know that it's composition, goals, tasks, norms, psychological safety, and coaching. Do you have a favorite? Is there a part of this that you go, man, if it just wasn't for this, this is the catalyst. This is the fulcrum that everything rests on.
But we know
What?
this is like trying to pick a favorite child, so it might not be easy here. But do you have like a favorite?
So the favorite and most influential are probably exactly opposite for me.
Oh yeah, great. Okay,
Okay.
let's hear it.
So my doctoral dissertation was on the timing of team coaching interventions. So
Okay.
everything for
Okay.
me, I was very focused on coaching, and especially there's kind of a like improvisational element to coaching
Very much
where
so.
people are observing what's going on in the group and figuring out the right moments to act and how to insert themselves in this. And so I find that fascinating. It's kind of what got me into loving groups, is this kind of real-time interaction, how people are reading one another's behavior and figuring out what they're going to do based on what the other people are going to do. Learning more about it, however, team coaching is really important, but that it's almost entirely subordinate to the other 5 conditions there, where if you mess up any of those other 5, it's really hard for team coaching to make a difference. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
and that as I've tried to help more teams and organizations, tried to help students, work with better teams, the stuff that people get wrong is much more frequently on the list of, especially what I call the elements of team structure, which were the
Okay.
first 4 things that you talk about: the composition, the task, the goals, and the norms.
Norms.
And so those are the things that I would say people are the invisible factors that people don't realize they're getting wrong. I think it's a lot easier to kind of notice once you know what psychological safety is, which is this shared sense that it's okay to take interpersonal risks, that
Hmm.
I can ask questions when I don't know something. I can, make a mistake and admit that mistake and try and admit that I'm learning from it. These kinds of interpersonal risks. Those things tend to be evident once people are aware of them. Whereas the influence of the structural factors, when we've got a team that's not quite composed right, that doesn't have the right norms, that's got a task that isn't well suited to a group, or the goals aren't as well defined or shared as we might think. Those things tend to be much more invisible, and that we don't notice them as quickly. And so it takes more of this kind of effort and raising people's awareness of them as these hugely influential factors to get people to really look at them seriously.
Let's dig into that, because I found that to be one of the most insightful things from my perspective. I've done a lot of work with teams and leaders and different things, but as a leader, and what you actually brought in, you shared a study that somebody did, and I forgive me, I don't remember who it was, where they were looking at teams and their performance, and then they'd ask the team members, should we change the members of the team? Should we, the process of the team, or should we change the structure? And it was like the processes were and the team members, but then the structure was never really, it was like a really low percentage of people who said that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was indeed, the thing that was probably going to make the biggest difference. And it hit me as, why is it that it's so hard for even team members, but particularly leaders, to really think about that structure, the composition part, the goals, those things, as opposed to some of the other factors? Because we know, I mean, leaders have tried to change their teams and to get them to perform better, you know, for millennia, and we're not doing a good job of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think there's two reasons. So first, I'll give credit to Michael Johnson and his colleagues at the University of Washington for that clever study that they did.
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of two reasons why the result, when you give people this case of a troubled, struggling team and say, okay, what do you want to change?
Yeah.
And I think it was 84% of people tried to intervene in the process of the team.
Yeah.
Now, in a way, that's very understandable, because team process is what we see.
Right.
When we're a member of a team, you can see, are people trying as hard as they can? Are there coordination problems? Is there, dysfunctional conflict in the team? And those are all elements of process, and that's the stuff that's very, very visible to us on a moment-to-moment basis. And I draw the analogy to, when we have a cold, right, we see symptoms first. You see that we have a runny nose, you see that you're coughing. But we've advanced in medicine far enough that we don't treat a runny nose by jamming as much tissue up our noses as we possibly can to, like, damn it, right? We know that's not the way we do it, right? We want to treat the underlying cause of this, right, which is generally some kind of virus in our system. But we don't do the same thing with teams. That we see these symptoms, we see these runny noses, and people run off to just treat the symptom. And of course, it's fine to treat symptoms. Like when you treat the symptoms of a cold, it makes you feel better, right? But it doesn't solve the underlying problem. And those things tend to be hidden. They tend to be things that we can't see as easily. And for a lot of team members, they're often things that may be harder to change.
Mm-hmm.
That, especially team composition, that feels like something that may be out of our control. The task, especially if it's given from your leaders or a higher level of the organization, you may not feel like you have full control over, what task we're charged with, what goal we were given, who's on this team. And so it feels like we don't have that control. And so I think people then turn to something that feels easier for them to handle, which is directly trying to intervene in the process.
But why is structure so important to the team? Why is that actually the most influential element?
So structure causes process. And and this is, I think, where a lot of mistakes in how teams are led, and especially in the kind of like team building industrial complex, makes this mistake of thinking like process alone causes different aspects of team effectiveness. But it's more like, so my mentor, Richard Hackman, I'm going to throw a like $20 word in here, used to call process epiphenomenal to team performance. And and what that means is, basically structure is causing performance, and process happens to come along for the ride. It
Mm.
happens too at the same time, but it doesn't have this direct causal relationship. Now, I think that's too strong of a statement, honestly, especially as somebody who has come to love studying team coaching and improvisation. The process plays an important role, but that when you pit process against structure, structure always wins. That
Mm.
like if it's an arm wrestling match, structure is just much, much stronger. So if you have a team that, has unclear goals, and like all members don't understand the goal the same way. And so let's say our goal is we're supposed to get to so I'm going to give you kind of a vague goal. We're supposed to get to California. It's
Okay.
like, okay, let's go to California. Great. We're all going to get there. Are we all going to get there in the same place at the same time? No, we're not going to do that, right? And that's why vague goals are going to prevent coordination, because if we're not going to the same place, of course, we're not going to act in ways that get us to the same place, that we're going to end up in two different places. And so like seeing, oh, there's a bunch of coordination problems. Well, yeah, if you don't have clear goals, if people don't understand why those goals are important, they're probably not going to work that hard. And so you need to articulate these things in order for people to do the things they need to do as team members. And it's the same for tasks that we know a lot about what makes work motivating, that we need to see the results of our own labor, that we can't be feeling like we're working on a task that we're never going to see the results of. So like if you're on a committee that's tasked with writing a report, but then that report kind of vanishes into the ether at the upper levels of the organization and you don't know what happens as a result of it. Well, guess what? People aren't going to be very motivated to do that work. And that's not because the humans are unmotivated. That's not because they're not being coached or led inadequately. It's because they don't understand why the work they're doing is important, and they're not going to see the results of it. And so these, if we kind of go one by one through all these elements of structure, you can see why when they're absent, we're going to have either problems with effort or problems with coordination. And that's going to cause process problems. Those process problems are going to invite in the kinds of dysfunctional interpersonal conflict we have, because it sucks to be a part of a team that's not performing well. And it's no wonder we start to blame one another and get annoyed with one another when things aren't going well. But then we go back to treating the runny nose of the team, and we don't actually look back to say, wait a minute, do we really have the same goal in mind? Do we actually know why we're here? Do we know why it's important? Does everyone, play an important role in getting this done? And then we have all these problems.
Kurt, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to follow up on that Colin, you've been using the term teams a lot, and you have some very specific ideas about what a team is versus just a group of people. And could you just spend just a minute describing what you mean specifically by a team, and how do you define a real team?
So a real team, and I use the definition that my mentor Richard Hackman made, almost ubiquitous in this literature, which is a small group of interdependent people working toward a shared goal. And so a real team's got to be small enough where we know everybody we're working with, and we can get into exactly how small that should be. But I'm recommending you have 3 to 7 people, or ideally 4.5 if you can find that 0.5 person out there somewhere, and that they got to be interdependent, meaning that the work I'm doing affects the work that you're doing, and that you depend on me to do what you're doing, and that we have to have a shared goal, right? That we have to be working towards some end that we all in this team agree is where we're trying to get to.
Yeah. So it's fair to say that there's a common use of the word teams to often refer to people who are basically all doing the same job for a whole bunch of different reasons that are not interdependent and of varying degrees and sizes. We're talking here about a group of interdependent people that know what each other's doing and have that sense of cohesive goal and share goal. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's more the jazz bands and the basketball teams that fit this definition of a real team, where you have, not maybe call centers are going to be a thing of the past here pretty soon, but if you have a group of people who are answering customer service calls, but they're all doing it individually, they don't depend on one another.
Yeah.
You're just calling them a team to kind of, give the illusion that they're more cohesive than they are. That's not what I mean by real team.
It's not the HR department or the accounting department or team or the sales team that is not doing collective sales but independent sales, but they're in a geographic region. That's not necessarily the type of team that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's right. But I also think it's not super helpful to draw a very clear line in the sand between these are teams and these are not teams. That in the book I talk about the idea of groupiness, that
Yes.
we go from being these social categories like Americans, like Harry Potter fans, like jugglers that are not interdependent. They're not small groups, right? They're not nearly these real teams, and those are the kind of least groupy groups. These social categories. And the most groupy groups are these real teams, like your basketball team, like your bands, things like that. But that there's a lot of room in between those two things, and that there's a lot of fluidity as well. That we can be part of, what I would usually call a co-acting group, like in this call center. But we could, for a moment, maybe there's a crisis, and we come together, and a real team kind of briefly emerges out of this co-acting group. And so I think it's more helpful to kind of think in terms of when we want to solve really important problems, real teams are perhaps humanity's best tool for solving those problems. That the great discoveries, the great businesses, the bands, the sports teams, the movies, almost everything that we love in the world was created by real teams. And yet, and so when we have groups that are not as groupy as a real team, we usually want to be nudging them towards being groupier and being more like these real teams.
Well, I'm gonna double down on that because you also talk about this myth of the lone genius, right? It's actually your first chapter in this, and so you're talking about all these great things, like the best solution to many of the problems of today are going to be solved by teams and not by that lone genius. And yet, it feels like, and you bring up some different statistics and various different things, that as a society, as a almost a global world, we're moving. It feels like we're moving away from groups and more into individualism. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's this bizarre contradiction in a way that by any measure, teams are making more of the good stuff in the world than ever before. That they're 6 times more likely to have patents, and those patents are likely to be far more influential. It's almost, you can't even start a business without having a team. They have like dating sites now for entrepreneurs to make sure that they like form a team before they go out looking for funding. Like it's like not even allowed for you to like seek external funding now as an individual. And that is because there's been a lot of evidence that no one person has the necessary knowledge, skills, and bandwidth to make a huge profitable business. That's really tough. Everybody's got a team. And yet, despite this increasing dominance of teams in the production of almost everything, we also see trends towards rising individualism around the world. That people have this belief more now than ever that we're not all in it together. That it's every person for himself. That we're all very unique, and that we all don't depend on one another. And that no matter what measure you look at of individualism, and surprisingly, no matter what country you look at, so even in countries that we usually think of as being what we would call more collectivistic countries. Usually, China is the kind of one that's held up as the prototype of a more collectivistic society where people believe that their immediate families, friends, communities are more of a part of their self than we do, say, in the United States. But even in those collectivistic countries, individualism is on the rise. And so we just see this global trend towards more and more individualism. But in a way, that belief isn't quite right. And that's one of the things I'm really trying to do in this book is to say, like, we're living in what I would call the age of individualism, that there's never been a more individualistic time to be alive than right now. And yet the problems that we're facing inherently require crossing group boundaries. They're going to require expertise that crosses nations, that crosses functions, that crosses organizations. And this individualism to me seems to be really standing in the way because we're starting to all, consume stuff that's saying, well, let's make myself better. I'm going to, read this book and it's going to help me be a better me. And then maybe indirectly that'll make the world a better place because I'm a better me. But we don't directly sort of intervene in saying, well, how can we be a better we? And that there's so much less attention being paid to that right now.
I just want to stop right there. That was just so beautifully said. that really was, Colin. I love that.
Thank you.
Hey, Groovers, we're interrupting your regularly scheduled programming with some big news, and we want you to be a part of it.
That's right. We've got not one, but two massive milestones hitting at the same time, and we're throwing a party to celebrate both of them.
Okay, so milestone number 1, we are about to cross 500 episodes this fall. When we started this thing back in 2017, Tim, did you ever dream that we would make it to 500? I didn't.
No, not at all. Never crossed my mind. And milestone number 2, it's our 8th anniversary. So we're combining both celebrations into a single, epic, live event in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and that live event is going to happen October 16th, 2025. So mark your calendars. And we're going to be taking over a private room at Malcolm Yards in my hometown of Minneapolis, where Tim used to live when he was cool. And here's the kicker. If you attend, you'll get to participate in a live behavioral science experiment with Nick Epley.
Yeah, the famous University of Chicago professor, the researcher who proved that talking to strangers can actually make your day better. He will be sharing some observations on a happy life, and the audience will participate in a hands-on experiment.
And this isn't just a party, it's science in action. So check the show notes for details, but consider this your personal invitation to join Tim and me, as well as many other people, on Thursday, October 16th in Minneapolis. Make your travel plans. Sign up now. Make it happen, folks. Here we go.
We can't wait to see you. And until then, keep finding your groove.
But in the book, Colin, you do talk about how that teams or groups are humanity's superpower, but you also talk about how they can be the source for evil, right? That we do get and you bring up some of the collectivism in various different pieces and the conformity that comes with, this aspect, kind of that whole second section of your book. So can you talk a little bit about how they can be our greatest asset, and yet they can still be some of the negative draw that we have as well?
Yeah. I mean, anything that's worth studying for your whole life probably has to have a little bit of paradox in it, right?
Right? Yeah, there you go.
There's got to be some like contradiction there, and that on some level, like groups themselves are a little bit of a contradiction because if we really wanted the best, most effective groups, there's other organisms on Earth that do this really well, and they do teamwork to the extreme. And there are things like ants or bees, right? But that they lose completely the individualism and the value of each unique individual. And any conflict between individual needs and collective needs is solved in favor of the collective when you're in these very extreme, collectivistic species. Now, humans aren't that way, right? Like, we
Right.
don't want to live in a world where every time there's a conflict between individual and collective needs, we resolve it in favor of the collective. That's like the most dystopian movies have this
The
kind
Borg
of
that you mentioned in the
yeah,
book,
the
right?
Borg,
You
yeah,
mentioned the
the Borg,
Borg. It's
yeah,
like
and Star,
all right,
yeah,
you are the collective, you're the hive.
yeah,
Yeah.
in Star Trek, like, we find that really frightening, that
Yes.
aspect of teamwork, especially I think in individualistic societies where, like, a lot of this stuff came out of the Cold War when there was explicit conflict with more collectivistic societies and economic model of communism. So there's this kind of like latent fear of collectivism, but there's some truth in that, right? Like, we
Mhm.
don't want to live in a world that's pure collectivism. We don't want to be ants. We don't want to be the Borg. We want to be something else.
Yeah.
And yet, in a group, we do need some little bit of conformity pressure, which can be healthy, that says we're going to go along to get along sometimes. We're not, every time we disagree with the collective, we're not going to all voice that every single time, or, agitate to get our way anytime the group's deviating from our individual preferences. That would be bad, right? That would not be a good world to live in anyway. So there's this kind of inherent paradox where we need conformity pressure. Like, social peer pressure is part of what makes groups good. Sometimes it makes us better versions of ourselves when we
Yeah.
join really productive groups. That we want that. We want to be held to a standard that's not just being in it for ourselves, that's really being there for other people, being a good citizen of some kind of community, and that's positive. We want that. But
Right.
that same tendency, that conformity pressure, can lead to disaster. And that's what, so kind of a behind the scenes thing. When I wrote the proposal for this book, my agent felt very strongly it needed to be called Group Think, 2 words.
Wow.
And yeah, and that, that's obviously a play on groupthink, which is this
Yep.
extreme conformity pressure, 1 word, that led to these disastrous decisions where conformity pressure was suppressing dissent. It was people not sharing their real opinions, not saying what they know. And so the group couldn't take advantage of all the resources that they had available. They end up making bad decisions, like the Bay of Pigs invasion, like the
Mhm.
Ford Pinto, like the Challenger disaster, like New
Yeah.
Coke, and that there's so many of these examples that are out there where we have some evidence that, like, this conformity pressure in decision making rooms was leading us to just disastrous outcomes for the world or for a company. Because I'm putting New Coke on the same level as these
Bay of
wars.
Pigs. Yeah.
Hey, come on. New
Yeah,
Coke was
yeah,
a strategic
Catastrophic.
move for
yeah.
the long, long haul. They
I know.
knew
Yeah,
it was going to fail,
yeah.
but the
It's coming
backfire.
around now.
Anyway,
Yeah.
never mind. Yeah. All right.
I want to loop back to something Kurt teed up in the speed round, and that was you attend, you go to a jazz club, and you sometimes sit in with a band, and
Mhm.
sometimes people come up to you at the end of the night, and go, "Oh man, you guys are fantastic," addressing you collectively, and like, how long have you been a part of this group, kind of thing, and you're like, "I'm not a part of this group." Tell us about that. What differentiates? How do you identify, or what is it that creates a sense of belonging to that group versus just I'm sitting in?
So belonging to a group, right, is almost entirely a psychological construct. And so you belong to a group when you think you do, and everyone else agrees with you that
Aha!
you
Yes. So,
belong,
so there's
right?
two sides
And
of that. Yes.
yeah, and but I mean, we can have that sense of belonging without
Yeah.
everyone else agreeing, right? That we certainly can
Mhm.
claim identities, claim group memberships without anyone else's consent, and that can inform our behavior just as much as anything else. The point I like about jam sessions, where so if you've never been to a jazz jam, first, what are you doing with your life? But second, that what that people just, you show up, you get on stage, we play music from kind of a standard repertoire that we all know, and And so, we don't have to rehearse. We don't have to have ever met. We don't, in some cases, even have to speak the same language. As long as you know what, autumn leaves, I can just say autumn leaves and away we go. So, this is this great kind of moment of there are these temporary groups kind of forming and unforming. And yet there's a house band that's being paid to be there, and that's an actual band, right? That they know who's a member of that band and who's not a member of that band. But that from the outside, when people are kind of coming in and out like this, you can't necessarily tell. So especially people who kind of come, they're not there at the beginning and then they show up and I'm already on stage and I'm playing and I stay there, often for quite a long time. So it's like, well, being a member of a group isn't this objective thing that observers get to decide. I don't get to decide whether you are or are not a member of that group. That's something that ideally is something that we're negotiating. That, like, if I wanted to be a member of the house band, I would have to talk to them and they'd have to agree with that. And so that's really the point I was trying to make there, is that, like, a lot of people think, oh, groups are what they appear to me to be. And that there's a lot of, really dysfunctional things happening in the world today, from people saying that observers get to decide whether you are or are not a part of the group, rather than it being a negotiation between the person and the incumbent members. And that when observers get to decide, we get all kinds of sort of, coercive, dysfunctional dynamics going on that are not really how group membership works, right? Like that these kind of psychological concepts that we have to negotiate between us.
It's interesting too, because you also bring up this idea of outgroups, right? And particularly in today, you bring on in some research that shows, hey, the way that we get likes or views on social media is not by pulling in people and saying, hey, here's all the great things that my in-group does. And again, we can think political parties or, even just whatever little subset of those that you have. But it is really about, who is the outgroup, and really focusing on the hate that you can focus in there. Is that part of this too? Is what you're saying is, like, you're defining the other group even though you're not part of them, and that it just spurs some of that hate and the attention, or am I conflating the two things?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the two are definitely related. And I think you're talking about some great research from Jay Van Bavel and his colleagues that is about, social media and outgroup hate, and how animosity towards outgroups. So saying, I'm outraged because, the other political party is doing X, Y, and Z. That, for the first time now, will get you more attention than saying, hey, we accomplished this great thing in my political party, and isn't that wonderful? So that if we compare these kind of in-group love and out-group hate on social media is what's getting people ahead now more than ever. And that trend, unfortunately, at least the last time I saw data about it, looks like it's accelerating. So this idea, I think, does play out sometimes when people are interacting and they take a little snippet of somebody's belief, right, and say, oh, you must be, member of political party I don't like, or you're one of us. And they're taking, little bits of beliefs and bundling them into one big identity. And I think the rise of polarization, especially in the US, is that, it used to be okay to kind of have pluralistic attitude, or pluralistic in the sense of different kinds of different opinions on different issues, and that they didn't all have to conform to sort of one political hegemony that bundles all of them together. And I took the example in the book of when Tucker Carlson was criticizing the change of footwear on M&M's spokes candies. So there was this whole kerfluffle online where, people were up in arms that now some of the M&Ms weren't wearing high heels and go-go boots anymore. And that but then that became a proxy for political beliefs, like what side of that issue you were on now said, that implied are you one of us or are you one of them? And that increasingly on social media, like every single opinion has started to have this character where we start to bundle beliefs and enforce conformity within the group. And that happens, that there's more enforced conformity when we feel like we're in a hot conflict with the other group. And that's actually a very robust psychological finding. When there's intergroup conflict, we enforce conformity within our group, and we also perceive more commonality or homogeneity among the outgroup, that we stop seeing people in the outgroup as individuals. We view them all as more alike than we do when we're not in this conflict. And both of those things are big problems.
Yeah, the outgroup becomes the Borg, and then we, we are the good people coming together. And we have a whole bunch of more questions, but I know Tim is aching to get down into some jazz conversation, so I'm gonna let him go and talk about that.
Clear the floor and let him solo.
Yeah, clear the floor, everybody. We're gonna get a deep dive here into some music, history, and other things.
Well, you talk about Kind of Blue, Miles Davis's 1959 classic. That if you haven't listened to Miles Davis on Kind of Blue, you have to go out and do it right now. You just put down the damn podcast and listen to Kind of Blue. But you talk about it as as an example of synergy, of this exemplar team of experts coming through. What can leaders take away from this? What's the lesson for leaders when it comes to leading teams, especially?
One of the most important points is, again, in the structure and in the composition of the team in the first place. So now, people think of Miles Davis's, sort of Kind of Blue, the late 1950s band, as an obvious band to have assembled. But at the time, this was kind of a crazy band to have assembled. That Miles's style and the tenor saxophonist John Coltrane, their style could not be more different.
Wildly different.
They're at polar opposites, and that some of the other musicians like Cannonball Adderley, like Wynton Kelly, were known for much more of a kind of bluesy style that like is almost on a completely different axis of comparison than the like continuum between Miles and John Coltrane. And so the bringing this particular group of people together, and then not doing songs that were in the style that any of them had been doing. So it was, that what was popular kind of leading up to this was either, bebop was still strongly associated with jazz, which tends to be really fast tempos, and there's a lot of different chords coming at you in quick succession. Or, kind of more bluesy revivals, which was called hard bop at the time. And then, but in Kind of Blue, they just play like one chord forever. And it's just, all right, we're not doing fast tempos. We're not doing a bunch of different chords. We're not going to, do these traditional blues that have the kind of, shuffly, groovy feel that we're used to. And that we're going to have this kind of, collection of contrasts all come and do that. And that when we look at what made this synergistic, in some ways, it's all of these things. It's these things about the structure. It's who we got into the room. It's the task that we asked them to do. And there's a lot I could also say about like the norms that, maybe get into the weeds a little bit too much for behavioral science podcast rather than the music podcast. But maybe we can keep talking about that after we're done.
I think we could do that. Yes. Yeah. I'd like to talk more about Freddie the Freeloader and flamenco sketches and those kinds of things as well. But for the time being, we want to say a big thank you to you. Colin Fisher, thanks for being a guest on Behavior Grooves.
Thanks so much. It's been so fun. Really fun. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Colin, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our evil sorting hat brains.
The sorting hat. I love that insight, by the way.
I mean, think about it. When I think of Harry Potter, that would not have been my first choice
No.
of any choice of an
No.
evil character. And
Yeah.
yet, now that it's been brought up, I can't help but think about it. Every single time I think about Harry
Yeah.
Potter, I go, oh, evil sorting hat.
Well, and when I've thought about this since our conversation with Colin, it wasn't just the sorting hat, but it's also the rule that says once you're in that house, you can't move.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it, because human beings move between groups.
But when we change, we change. That personality, I mean, again, what was it? They're 11 years old when they go in this, and they're 18 when they leave. Do you think you might change in that time period? I don't know. Go through puberty, maybe have a life event that happens to you, or just the gradual change that we all go through over years. Personality is not static. Personality changes, and that is a big piece of this. But yes, that the groups aspect of that, of being stuck in there and then identifying, and the norms of that group being transposed over into the individuals. That's man.
Totally. Okay, can we start with? Can we groove on a little bit of music here? Going to California.
Is that a Led Zeppelin song?
That's a Led Zeppelin song. It's a great tune. Yeah.
Have you ever played it live? Have you ever done a cover of it?
Have I? No. It's ridiculous to cover Led Zeppelin unless you have Robert Plant doing the singing. So
why? No. You're not gonna get those high notes.
No. Just short story. No, but I'll say this about that track, that it certainly highlights all the really amazing talent in the band, as these guys, as acoustic, players, mandolin and acoustic guitar, not just big, monstrous, electric, bombastic, heavy metal kind of guys. They were really very sophisticated musicians. So I love it for a lot of reasons. But okay, going to California. Okay, so I want to follow this line of thinking from Colin's discussion about we're going to California. Okay, so everybody believes we're all going to California, right? Is that enough?
Well, the goal, right? And again, I love the way that Colin framed this idea that as a leader, we often set goals that are similar to, we're going to California, which sounds great. It's inspirational. It has a lot of zest in it. We're going, yay, California, cool. But if we're left to our own devices, what does going to California mean? Where in California are we going? California is a big state.
That's a great place to start. Where in California? Yeah.
How are we going to get there? Are we all going together? Are we each taking our own? Are we flying? Are we taking trains? Are we driving? Are we hiking? Are we hitchhiking across the country? What is the way that we're getting there? So
and what about, do we have a desire for arriving at the same time?
Yes.
Or does it matter?
It doesn't matter if we're all there together, if we're not there, if we're all in the same place. There's a lot to be desired about the specificity. Can I say a word? Can I ever say those words?
You said it perfect. Specificity.
That's what I meant to say. That's not what I said.
I know, but that's what I heard.
That's only because we've been doing this for 8 years, and you've learned to understand Kurt's mispronunciation of words. So the specificity of the goal is really important for the team to be effective. And I think that is very important.
Yeah. And of course, I think we should talk about this in a couple minutes, but I just want to mention that it's not always about it. The more specificity doesn't necessarily equal a better goal.
Right.
We'll come back to that. But when there is something specific, as in when do we want to arrive? How are we going to get there? And exactly where in California are we headed, like as part of our goal? That makes it easier for each team member to go, okay, now let's plan a route that we can all agree on. Or if we're going to take different routes, we can talk about those different routes in order to achieve that goal specifically. And so the better a team or a leader expresses that goal and helps people understand what that goal is, then the higher likelihood of actually achieving it in a way that's cohesive and meaningful to the organization and meaningful to the people on the team. They're going to take more from it if they actually get out and are able to accomplish what they set out to do.
So it's interesting because you talk about going to California in and of itself may not be a bad thing, and it might be better than we are going to Fifth and Seventh Street in LA
Yeah,
on October 17th after this, and we're there is a level of inspiration that goals have, and goals need
mhm,
to tap into something that is going to be that intrinsic motivator, right? There can be lots of extrinsic motivators that we have, but
right.
those goals that tap into that intrinsic aspect, the inspiration, the climbing the mountain, the doing something new that nobody's done, curing cancer, right? All of those are great, big, hairy, audacious goals, as they say, and whatever. I call them keystone goals in the work that we do. But in order to actually achieve those goals, and those can be the rallying cry, but you have to have then the steps and the specificity. I said it that time to get to where you're going, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
California, fantastic. But let's determine, are we going to Yosemite? Are we going to San Fran? Are we going to San Diego? Where is it that we are going?
Right. Right.
And then how are we going to get there? Are we going together? What is our purpose for going there? What are we trying to achieve as a result of this? And then every individual has to understand their part in that process.
Yeah, and there's two things I want to mention here. When we're talking about teams, and I think that Colin references in the book. I don't remember if we talked about it specifically, but teams are interdependent groups,
Yes.
right? So think of a team as like a baseball team in the United States, right? There aren't nine catchers on the field. There's one catcher, and there's one first baseman, and there's one third baseman, and there's just one of each, and they're all collectively and interdependently achieving specific things. So that's the kind of group that we're talking about, not just a work group where you got a manager that leads 9 designers and they all work on a variety of different design projects that are not interdependent. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that people go into goals with expectations, and we have this calculator in our head that's going to say that's achievable or not. And we know
Mm.
from Latham and Locke that when we perceive that goal as achievable, even though it might be a stretch, it's much more likely for the team to band together. And this is a tricky part of a team-based goal, is that more or less everybody kind of has to buy in on it.
Hmm.
And they all kind of have to be willing to join in that, whether it's a useful delusion of or it's an actual ingrained perception. They kind of have to go, I buy into that. I'm going to go for that goal. I support the team's effort in that to collectively achieve that.
Which is another interesting part of this, because we know that if you can make that goal personal, that it has more of that buy-in. So
Yeah.
Kruglansky, Fishbach, both of them talk about that personal aspect of goals. And so
Mhm.
to do that, though, that catcher on your team is going to have a slightly different perspective than the third baseman, then slightly different perspective than the right fielder. And so as a manager, it gets really difficult to be able to understand every individual's component and what is shared, what is unique, what is idiosyncratic, and making sure that you're doing that can be the difference between having a successful team and having just a ho-hum team. And that is hard work. And oftentimes I think managers kind of punt on that. I'm using a different sporting analogy here, but they don't go that fourth down and go for it. They kind of let up, and they don't do that extra personalization of that work to get there.
Well, it's hard. Yeah,
It is
it's
hard.
hard. It's hard, especially when you're dealing with professional people who have their own ideas and opinions. I'm working with a client right now where there's a variety of people who are very well informed and have very specific opinions about a project, and that makes it wonderful because you bring a lot of expertise to the table. At the same time, when those opinions start to get either political or turfy or that's not the way I see it, without being willing to buy into the shared vision, it can really blow things up. It can just
It's
really
funny
make it
because I'm
difficult.
working in the same exact thing. We have an executive team that we're working on. Again, we have a going to California type goal. We are building this, incentive compensation philosophy. And again, they're not a working team. They are an executive group. So there
Yeah.
is,
Oh,
the
yeah.
different sales leads, there are finance, there are, other aspects within the organization that are all playing into this. So California means a lot of different things to each of these members. And they all align around, yeah, we need to go to California, but some Californias look very different. They're in, like, some people are down in San Diego. Some people are definitely way up in the northern upper right hand corner of California, and there's a lot everywhere in between. And so when you're trying to make decisions based upon that, there's a lot of angst, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of trepidation because they're talking and they're not necessarily hearing each other because they're each coming at it from their own perspective.
Yeah, yeah. So we've got all kinds of team dynamics that go into making things work. I think you just kind of teed up one issue is listening and having decent EQ, being able to have psychological safety that people can talk about the issues without feeling a sense of reprisal or fearing a sense of reprisal. Right. That doesn't mean that you can't say anything, but there needs to be a sense that we're all in this together rather than just whatever so and so has to say is going to trump what everybody else says. Those are kind of things. I think there's also a couple things that we can do when it comes to goal striving as well. Once we agree on that, we're going to California and how we're getting there. I think the goal striving part, which comes out in Kruglansky and Fishbach, is to emphasize what you brought up earlier, make it as personal as possible. Like, help me feel connected to it as a team member as we're going along. Help me. I think leaders need to bear some responsibility to help individual team members really get invested along the way. I think
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and again, if we think about some of the specific things that leaders can do, right? Beyond what we talked about with Colin, I let Fishbach talked about, looking at how do you talk about the progress you've made?
Yeah.
Do you talk about how
Yeah.
far you've come versus how far we have left? And there's a transition point typically in doing that.
Yeah.
The beginning,
Yeah.
it's always about how far you've come. The first week, look at what we've achieved this first week. Look at where, until you get to about that halfway point, and then you switch over. And now you start looking at, hey, we're more than halfway. Look at how close
Right.
that goalpost is, right? He
And,
also, oh, go ahead.
no, keep going.
I was just going to say that, which is another part of that, is like goal gradient theory, which talks about that natural energy increase the closer we get to a goal. I always use the example of my daughter going to the park, is about 8-9 blocks away from us. And when she was young, we'd be going and she'd be pulling me at the beginning, right? First couple blocks away, yay. And then it was like, oh, this is work. I got to do this. And now it's like, Daddy, Papa, pick me up, carry me. So I'd have to pick her up and carry her until I got to like where we could see where the park was, or like, we know it's right over that little ridge. And then she would be like let me down, let me jump down, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah.
That is such a great analogy. Kids can be so informative in that way. This is really, really important stuff. There's also, last thing on my mind about this is that it's good if you want to repeat this behavior. If you're a leader and you want to repeat this behavior, have some reward at the end. Have some kind of celebration. Mark it. Make it an event. Make it vivid. So and be able to review. Hey, this is what we did. This is how we did it, and let's celebrate that.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, you can have the extrinsic reward and all those pieces of it.
Yeah.
For doing it, for achieving it. But the intrinsic aspect of that, I think, is really cool. One thing we know, unexpected rewards have a stronger impact on us, on memory and other aspects. So, yeah. So,
absolutely.
All right. So next time your team sets out, make sure you're just not going to California, Timmy. We're just heading to California. Make sure you can use that, but make sure that you get down into the details after you bring that inspirational, that keystone kind of goal that you're setting, and then define your destination. Choose your route, right? Make sure you know why you're going there. What do you hope to get out of being in California? And that's the first step in kind of unlocking your collective edge.
Yeah. If you know and communicate as a leader what that destination is with that clarity, the journey becomes more efficient. It becomes more effective. It could be groovier.
Ooh,
could be.
I like that. We're the groovier. So we're taking the magic bus out to California, right?
We may or we may not. Right?
Is it the Scooby-Doo groovy kind of van that we're going in? Yeah.
Yeah, munchies. Yes, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that's not the groovier you meant. That's not the groovier you meant. No. Okay.
No.
All right. Sorry.
Okay. So, two last closing thoughts. One, please join us October 16th, 2025 in Minneapolis for our 8th anniversary, celebrating our 500th episode for Behavioral Grooves. And thanks for listening. We appreciate you tuning in and checking us out. And until next time, we hope that you use Colin's great ideas on Team Cohesion to help you go out and find your groove.
And find your team's groove too.